1 degree of warming. That is where we're at now, although frankly, from the support that both the two major parties of this country give to the coal and gas industry, you wouldn't think it. You'd be led to believe we have all the time in the world. We don't. I said in my first speech last week that the arrival of my grandchildren spurred me into more direct political action. So I want to speak up for their future and everyone's. My beautiful grandkids are 7 and 9 years old. Without real, deep and rapid cuts to emissions, without a halt on new coal and gas projects and a phasing out of existing coal and gas, what world will they inherit? 1 degree of warming. At 1 degree of warming, we already have unprecedented heat waves and wildfires across large parts of Europe and the US. London reached 40 degrees. In mid-May, India hit 49 degrees, the highest India has recorded in 122 years. At 1 degree of warming, we're already seeing climate disasters affecting crop production and fuelling inflation. And of course, at 1 degree of warming, we have major flooding events at ever-increased frequency across Australia's east coast. In the floods early this year, parts of my electorate of Ryan were inundated, and in Indooroopilly, tragically, 1 person drowned. We saw damage to homes, businesses and public facilities in many parts of the electorate, disrupting lives and livelihoods. Even areas far from the Brisbane River were affected, such as Mitchelton's $1 million all-weather football field and homes in Ashgrove and Enoggera Creek. Between breakfast time and midnight on February the 25th, Moggill Creek in Kenmore rose by nearly 4 metres, inundating Kenmore High School's oval and sweeping away years of creekside revegetation works, submerging tennis courts, lapping at the school's buildings much higher up the hillside. But in Ryan, it was not only those with direct damage from floodwater who were affected. The suburbs of Moggill, Bellbowrie, Pullen Vale, parts of Pinjarra Hills and neighbouring areas were effectively isolated for days because of their dependence on a single arterial road, Moggill Road, flooded at 4 points. The closure of the Moggill ferry service because of the river conditions compounded the lack of access. Because their only route into the rest of the city was impassable, normal life was disrupted for thousands of residents, and the delivery of food, medicines and other essentials was interrupted. Health and aged care workers could not reach their places of work, exacerbating already problematic staff shortages and COVID absences. About 1,000 secondary school students were unable to reach their schools. The supermarket in Moggill began to run out of fresh food, and but for the efforts of a GP sleeping on his surgery floor in Bellbowrie, even urgent primary health care would not have been available to many. Pregnant women had to be rowed across floodwater to reach the hospital, and some school children, stranded on the wrong side of the inundated area, were separated from their parents. Nor was Ryan the only electorate affected in our city, as the members for Brisbane and Griffith will attest. That flood came only a decade after the last so-called unprecedented flood in Brisbane. That's 1 degree of warming. That's the world my grandchildren already live in. They haven't known anything else. So, what happens at 1.5 degrees of warming? We see an exponential increase in the frequency and severity of bushfires, of floods, heat waves, droughts, leading to loss of life and livelihood. Mass forced migration from countries going underwater or whose economies are collapsing under the strain of crop failures. Do we really think that once we're seeing rolling extreme weather events, that the inflation due to supply-side shocks that we're seeing now will ever go away? How often will the people of Ryan experience major flooding events at 1.5 degrees of warming? How much more severe will they be? That could be as soon as the end of this decade. My 2 grandchildren will be 15 and 17. How much longer then till we reach 2 degrees of warming? That's likely by mid-century. My grandchildren will be in their 40s and 50s. What will that world look like? Well, if we want to find out what that future looks like, all we need to do is wait, because currently there are enough new coal and gas projects in the pipeline in Australia to blow well through our carbon budget and take us to that 2 or even 3 degree warming world. 43% emissions reduction by 2030 is not enough, but with the ratchet mechanism negotiated by the Greens, we may, over the next few years, be able to get it to 75% by 2030 and ultimately to 100% by 2035, which is in line with what is actually needed. The Greens will fight every step of the way to get there. But it's also easy to be distracted by targets, and I fear a lot of this debate has been distracting us from the bigger issue, and that issue is new coal and gas. We cannot overstate the problem here. If all of the coal and gas projects currently in the pipeline go ahead, they will produce 30 times, that's right, 30 times the emission that the 43% target will cut. Even if we exclude the emissions produced by burning this coal and gas overseas, and why should we? These new coal and gas projects will still produce triple the emissions that the 43% target will cut, thanks to Ketan Joshi and the Australia Institute for those figures. New coal and gas projects not only wipe out the emissions reductions of this bill, but they will lead to Australia's emissions increasing. What's really clear here, and it shouldn't need to be said, is that you cannot say you're trying to solve the problem while actively making it worse. This is common sense. This is understood by the people in my electorate and by people across Australia. But this basic common sense seems to be lacking among many members of this chamber. So who benefits when we're distracted from the issue of new coal and gas? Glencore, BHP, Santos, Adani, Woodside. These vampire-like corporations are all salivating at the prospect of the billions in profits that can be made by opening up new coal and gas projects in this country, robbing the nation of its wealth while driving the climate crisis. To get a sense of how much power these corporations have, during the past 7 years, 5 of the gas industry's biggest corporations have earned about $138 billion in revenue in Australia without paying a cent in corporate income tax. Just let that sink in. So who benefits from us being distracted from coal and gas? It's these huge multinationals, many of whom are donors to the Labor and Liberal parties. But you know who suffers from this distraction? My grandchildren, your children and grandchildren. Who suffers? Everyday people whose homes get submerged in severe floods. Everyday people whose whole lives get upturned by bushfires ripping through their communities. Everyday people whose cost of living goes through the roof because of repeated crop failures and supply chain disruptions from severe weather events. The solutions are there. Stop new coal and gas. Disaster-proof our cities. Phase out existing coal and gas while building new industries in publicly owned renewables, green steel and manufacturing. The prosperity that can come from this is absolutely enormous, but we have to break the stranglehold fossil fuel corporations hold over our political system. I invite members of the Labor Party to have the courage to help us in the Greens break that stranglehold. This bill, with the ratchet mechanism negotiated by the Greens, might, and I stress might, represent the beginning of a genuine approach towards the deep and urgent emissions reductions that Australia needs. But that all depends on the government's steps over the next 3 years. Will Labor continue to back new coal and gas and wipe out even the low-ball emissions reductions of 43%? Will they continue to listen to their fossil fuel corporate donors, handing them billions in public money? Or will they back everyday people? Will they back our grandkids and their grandkids? The current rhetoric from the government does not give one a lot of hope. But what does give one hope is that everyday Australians do want change. This election showed it, and whether politicians in this building like it or not, they must make that change, or the Australian people will replace them with people who are willing to do so.